In this lesson, I'm going to be talking to you about the different kinds of things that you can sell. In a lot of people's minds, there's basically just like two things. There's a product and there's a service. And that's true. Those are two of the ways, but it turns out there are plenty of other ways also. So I'm going to organize this information into two categories. One is the category of things where you need a fair amount of money in order to get started with it. It can be a great business model, but if you don't have money, it's hard to get started with it. But if you really love one of the things that are in this category, then think about how you might acquire the money, such as getting loans or investors. So I don't want you to count this out, but just realize that you're going to need a little capital for that bucket. The second category are things that have a very low cost to getting into it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a better or worse business model. It just means that it costs less money to get started. So I'm going to start with the higher cost things first. So let's start with a product. A product, if it's a physical product, does have a slightly higher cost of getting into the market because you have to manufacture it, you have to store it, which is called inventory, and you have to distribute it. You have to have some way of transporting it to whoever is buying it from you. But once you design a product, you only design it once and then you just make copies of it, right? So you just keep selling the same thing over and over again. So a product can be a great way of making money, especially if you are selling a perishable product, meaning something that the people don't just buy it once every 20 years. They need to buy it maybe once a month or every few months. So for example, cosmetics or body products. Typically, the shelf life of those are only, maybe 3 months, something like that. And so somebody needs to keep buying it. Like if they like what you gave them and they want to keep getting that benefit, they have to keep buying your product, as opposed to a refrigerator, which nobody wants to be buying one of those more often than every 20 years. Like if your refrigerator only lasted 6 months, that's one refrigerator manufacturer who'd be out of business. So the things that you want to think about with a product is, if it's going to be a physical product, how are you going to get your product made, store it? How are you going to manage the inventory? It's a little more complicated for your accounting because of having to do cash flow and inventory management. You don't want to wind up with a bunch of product you can't sell because you overproduced and now it's all going bad if it's a perishable product. You also don't want to have people wanting to buy from you, but there's a backlog in the supply chain because you didn't anticipate the sales. So getting that right is a little tricky, but it is the kind of thing where, honestly, if you can come up with a winning product just once, it can make, it can scale infinitely. Like you could sell millions of that one idea. So, you can really make a lot of money. It doesn't matter how many hours are in a day. You just hire another factory to make more if you need more. And so a product can be great. And if it's what's called an intangible product, a non-physical product, like say an ebook, for example, well, then the upside is even greater because it's truly an unlimited number that you can sell. And in this case, you don't even have to keep inventory and you don't even have to kind of worry about like a big capital investment up front. So in that case, when it's a non-physical product, then a product is a way that's a lower barrier to entry way of getting into a market. Another one of the higher entry ones is what's called a shared resource. So if you think like if you join a gym, well, you could buy that equipment and have it in your house, but it's better if the gym buys a whole bunch of equipment and then lots of people use it and they just pay a fee to be a part of that gym. Amusement park is the same way. We're not going to have a roller coaster in our backyard, but the amusement park can buy a roller coaster and then we could just pay for access to that shared resource. So of course there's a pretty big barrier to entry because you got to be able to afford that gym and that equipment or afford to build that amusement park and promote it and all of that. So this one's a little bit higher. And then of course you need to be making enough money. You need to charge enough so that you can maintain that resource. Because if the thing falls apart or if the place is too crowded because you sold too many gym memberships and nobody can ever get the machine they want, then you're going to wind up losing people and eventually it gets a bad reputation and then nobody wants to go there anymore and stuff like that. Another high, well, actually, this next one, it can be high or low depending on how you do it. And that's basically reselling. So when you look at any kind of retail store, pretty much what they're doing is reselling. They buy it at wholesale and they get a lower price because they get it directly from the manufacturer. And the manufacturer, they don't want to be setting up shops all over the place. They don't want to have a store everywhere. And so they're happy to sell it to the retail people, especially if you look at something like groceries. Well, the farmer doesn't want to have to drive his crop to every single store across the entire region he's selling to. It's much better for him to sell to a food distributor, and then that person sells to the local stores, and then the stores sell to you and me who come in and buy. And it's also convenient for us because instead of having to drive all the way down to Ferndale or someplace where they're growing the crops, we can just go to our local store and it's been distributed there for us. So resell, buy low, sell high. The reason the cost of entering that market could be either high or low is because there's just so many different ways of doing that. If you're going to actually rent out retail space and sell something that's perishable, okay, you probably need a little more money. There's a little more risk involved and there's more capital you need up front, and you're going to need to have employees and you got to pay them even before you've built up a large volume of people accustomed to coming there. So there's a little bit more money there. But if it's something like where, you hear people who will buy like a case of something. So they buy it by the case and then they just go door to door selling it. People will do that with like bottled water or different kinds of things. So that doesn't necessarily have to have a high cost of entry. There's just a big hassle factor. Basically, people are paying you to save themselves the hassle of having to go and get it. And that means you are the one taking on that hassle of then having to go door to door trying to get one of them to buy it. But it is a very accessible thing. It's something that pretty much anyone can do. You just have to be willing to invest your time and buy that little bit up front, $20 in, $30 out. You do that enough times. If you've got the time, it's sure money. You just have to be aware of the vending laws and the permit laws for selling things in whatever your municipality is. Get a permit if you need one. Another one that's a high cost of entry is anything where you're renting or leasing something out. So for example, the most obvious one is a car lease, right? You don't have the money to buy the car outright and you don't even know that you want to keep it all that long, but you might get a lease for 3 years and you can drive a nicer car. And if you're someone who replaces your cars every 3 years anyhow, then it makes sense for you to lease, especially since if you have a business, the entire car payment is then tax deductible as long as you lease it in the name of your business. So it's a great business model for the person who's getting it. And it's also a pretty good business model for the people who are leasing it out, as long as they charge enough that they're sure that they can replace that asset. If they don't charge enough money after the lease is over, they've got something that has too much less value, like they lost money instead of gaining it. So you got to watch your pricing. But it doesn't have to be something as big as a car, like an apartment. Like, I rent out an apartment at my place. I rented out furnished. So in addition to having a place big enough to have an extra apartment in it, which was an investment on my part, I also had to buy all the furnishings and all of that. And then I pay the utilities in the way that I'm doing it. So I've put money in up front, but then somebody else is just paying rent and they can leave at the end of the lease and they can move on. Or if they want, they can keep renewing. And so they have the flexibility and I have the continual revenue after having put in that initial money. So it's good for us both. Another one is something like a space rental. Like if you want to have an event, you might rent out a space that somebody does just that with. That's also another, if you've got a good location and you've got a place where people are doing a lot, you got a lot of creative people. It's sure money. It's very straightforward, but people need it. Even people do it with expensive clothes. Like you heard of Rent the Runway? They're renting out dresses. So it's a good model. You just need to be able in the first place to buy whatever it is you're going to rent. And it needs to be something that's expensive enough that people see a reason to rent it instead of just buying their own. Another one that's in the high cost of entry category, and by the way, just realize there are actually a lot of these, okay? So another one in that category is loaning money. Now, when I say loaning money, it's obvious. First thing that comes to your mind is probably a bank, right? They loan you money, whether it's a credit card or a mortgage or whatever, and you pay them back plus interest. They make their money on the interest. Now, to be honest, banks also make it on over limit fees and bounce check fees and all kinds of things, right? They make it a lot of other ways too. But the main model is that they're getting paid with interest. But you may not really realize that whenever you are giving somebody payment terms, when you say, okay, if you pay up front, it's this amount, but if you pay over 3 payments, it's these payments, and usually you charge a little bit more, that's because you're making a loan. And so your interest, your cost for assuming that extra risk that they may not repay the loan is that extra little bit you charge for those terms. Another way that you might be giving out a loan, there's a company called Prosper that I've used, and I've seen a return of about 9% per year when my bank account was returning, I think, like 0.1% per year. So Prosper was a much better place for me to put my money. But obviously, before you can loan money out, you need to have a little extra money. If you need the money to live on, you can't be loaning it to anybody, right? So this is another one. It's fairly likely you're going to get your money back. Like that Prosper 9% was after the people, accounting for people who didn't pay it back. So that's like in the end, that's how much it worked out to be, which is a pretty good return for, for something that's so easy. Another high cost to entry way of selling something is when you sell what's called an option, which basically means people are buying the right to get something later, but they don't have to exercise that option. They don't have to actually do it. Groupon, for example, is that model. They sell discount coupons. So you buy it through Groupon at a certain amount, but you may never actually use that, right? But Groupon still keeps your money if you don't get the refund fast enough, right? Similarly, if you're getting an apartment and you put down a deposit to hold the apartment, that deposit is an option. It says you have the option that this can be your apartment, but you have to sign the lease within this period of time before your option expires. Another very common option is an airline seat, right? You buy that ticket, that gives you the option of taking that flight. But if you miss the plane, oh well. And actually, a lot of airlines, they will even overbook because they figure a lot of people are going to miss the plane. So that's the business of selling options, which is the right for somebody to do something. Even a movie theater is an option. You buy the ticket, but you may not ever go in. I've had that happen to me. I was actually dating a physician, and we bought the tickets, and while we were still standing in line to get our seats, his pager went off, and he was like, oh, we got to go. I got to go to the hospital. So we didn't see that movie, but we'd already paid for our option. They actually gave us some money back, but they didn't have to because all we had bought was the option of seeing that movie. Okay, so this next one is very interesting. Doing it the traditional way, it is a high cost of entry, but there's a way around this that I will share with you, and then you decide whether that matches who you are or whether you're like, oh no way. And that is insurance. So basically with insurance, whoever's selling the insurance is betting that the likelihood of something bad happening isn't as high as the people buying the insurance fear it will be, or that at least it will be so few people it happened to that they'll have made money off of so many people where the bad thing doesn't happen. So for example, if I have a house, I definitely want insurance on my house, because if my house burns down, I've lost the entire house, right? So it's a big risk for me. And so, paying $600 a year to not have to worry about that, it's definitely worth it, right? To the insurance company, it's like you say, well, why is it so low? Why is it only $600 a year for a whole house? And it's because it's not that likely that the whole block is going to burn down. It's possible. It's not that likely the whole city is going to burn down. Like they're insuring so many houses that they know a few of them are going to burn down, but not that many. Comparatively, even though cars cost a lot less than houses, car insurance is often higher than home insurance. And that's because the likelihood of something bad happening is actually a lot higher with cars than houses. But a way around this, if you don't have the money to essentially be selling peace of mind, then do you realize that you actually can take out insurance on someone else? So for example, most corporations, actually, I don't even know any that don't do this. In general, corporations, they take out insurance on their top executives. They take out life insurance, and they take it out in the millions of dollars. So if one of their top executives dies, Guess who gets those millions of dollars? It's not the family. It's the corporation. Actually, by law, there's nothing to stop you from taking out insurance on anyone and making yourself the beneficiary. You just need enough of their information, kind of basic information about who they are to identify them and to know them well enough to actually know if they're deceased and it's time for you to collect. But that's it. You have to decide for yourself if that's a business you really want to be in, but there's nothing to stop you from doing it. And it's like you pay $25 a month and then the payout is $200,000 if the person is ever deceased and so on. It's a scale like that. Another high cost entry one, this is actually the last one that's a high cost entry, is investing in other people's businesses. So if you've got a bunch of capital sitting around, instead of starting your own business, especially if you're someone who has more money than ideas, then you just say, okay, I like the idea of your business. I like what you're doing. I don't want to do the work and I don't have an idea of my own, but I like that idea. So I'll give you my money. And if you do well with it, then when you sell the business, I'll get a percentage of it. And I'm hoping, of course, that you're going to sell it for a lot more than it was worth at the time that I bought into it. For the most part, that's what investors are thinking. So if you get investors, just realize they're going to want you to sell that business. Sometimes they're getting like a dividend, which means they're getting a little bit of money out of your profits ongoingly. But most businesses, like the model the investors are interested in, is you're going to sell that business for a lot more than it was worth when they bought into it, so that their percentage share is going to be worth a lot more. And that's how they make their money. All right, that's all the high cost barrier to entry ones. And so now are the ones that are always a fairly low investment, or at least there's always a way that you can do it that's low.